Hey, I'm back. So, I've been planning on making a Deltarune theory for a while now, and while this isn't the one I had in mind when mentioning that before, after playing through and digging into Chapter 3 and 4, everything just clicked with this one. So, it's here first. With that out of the way, I believe that I know who the Roaring Knight is, and what their motivations are. So, as we all likely know by now, the Knight is the secret boss and the final encounter of Chapter 3, with them also appearing throughout Chapter 4. That said, the game doesn't exactly directly state a lot of information regarding their identity or motivations, so let's start with basic observations before working our way through the suspects from there. On the surface, the Chapter 3 fight doesn't tell us a whole lot other than that they A. have horns on their helmet, more on that in a minute, and use a weapon that appears to be a bat, B. are capable of leaving the Dark World since they brought Undyne out of Chris's house into the shelter, and C. they have some weird properties in the Dark World since they can change their form into a ball and what looks like a bird. And of course, we can't forget that the Knight is left-handed. Now, on that note about the helmet, we know that they're wearing a horned helmet due to a scene in Chapter 4 in which you can choose to focus on the Knight, revealing these lines. The image of the Knight began to fade into your mind. The image changes. The helmet begins to come off. Suddenly, you tried extremely hard to picture Jockington. Jockington is in a nest, and the soccer balls are his eggs. Timmy shows up and is mad that one of the soccer balls is... You realize that you could just open your eyes. With the basics out of the way, let's attempt to figure out who the Knight is, by first figuring out who it isn't. Given Chapter 3's ending, one of the easiest names we can mark off of this list would be Chris. That said, we can also mark off any Darkners. After all, the Knight brought Undyne to the shelter through the Dark World, and only a Lightner can open a Dark World, which was revealed to us at the end of Chapter 2 during the Queen encounter. Next up, whoever it is, unless they're ambidextrous, would have to be left-handed, as the weapon of the Knight is held in their left hand during the fight with them in Chapter 3. Assuming this to be the case, this would seem to rule out Carol Holiday, as she takes the guitar... Editor's note. Okay, so, Carol actually grabs the guitar with her left hand before passing it into her right hand. This was a decently sized mistake on my part. Regardless, the Knight still likely isn't Carol due to Carol being at the Holiday house when Chris and Susie leave. Meanwhile, the Knight is already inside the Dark World at the church once they get there. This would require Carol to somehow get to the church before Chris and Susie, which, while not impossible, after all Chris manages to do a lot while we're in the bathroom at the end of Chapter 2's Weird Route, still feels like a valid point against her being the Knight. This same point would also seem to disqualify Papyrus from being the Knight as well. After all, while we haven't seen him yet in Deltarune, in Undertale he can be seen holding both the orb for the maze puzzle and a dog treat in his right hand. Ultimately, this ends up leaving us with two main candidates, Des and Asriel. Now, while the newest bit of consensus is that Des is the Knight's identity, this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. To explain why I say that, we first need to head to the Spampin Sweepstakes, where on the /Des page we could find a picture of what we now know to be Des's guitar as a song called Find Her plays. The song, Find Her, has the exact same melody as the song Lost Girl from Chapter 2, and it seems apparent that this leitmotif is associated with the Des. With that in mind, adding on to what's implied by these song names, we know from Chapter 2 that Noelle has been searching online about her missing sister for seemingly some time now. Additionally, we know that the Holiday household seemingly has some level of rules regarding entering Des's room and tampering with her belongings. We can see this clearly from Noelle's response to us attempting to enter Des's room and her initial reaction to Susie using Des's guitar. All of this paints the clear image that Des is currently missing and that in some way, shape, or form that this still seems to be a delicate topic for the Holiday family. Now consider this. The code to the shelter is taped inside of Des's red guitar, the same one from the Spampin Sweepstakes /Des page. That said, Chris didn't want us seeing the code, whoever they were on the phone with didn't want Susie getting the guitar, and the cliffhanger at the end of Chapter 3 reveals that the door to the shelter appeared to have been opened for Chris before our perspective cuts to the credits. So, why is this important? Well, two reasons. One is that there is a clear-cut connection between Chris and the Knight, and the other is that the knight was seemingly capable of taking Undyne to the shelter at the end of Chapter 3. Elaborating on this first point, when fighting the knight in Chapter 3, Chris does significantly less damage against the knight when compared to Susie and even the team's resident healer, Rousey. Likewise, the knight does less damage to Chris, only ever knocking their health down to -80, compared to Susie and Rousey's -999. This is also without even mentioning that after successfully beating the encounter, when the knight one-shots the party members, Rousey and Susie are directly hit. Chris, on the other hand, appears to be knighted by the knight, with this even being what the sprite for this animation refers to this action as. Lastly on this note, take 2 points from Chapter 4, the previously mentioned incident where Chris attempts to hide the knight's identity from us, and the closet in the church, which seems as if it'd be perfect for the knight to hide within, and yet Chris only half complies with our attempt to open it, turning the doorknob and nothing more. Assuming that the knight is hiding in the church's closet at the end of Chapter 4 would be one thing, but noting that they also brought Undyne to the shelter would seem to reinforce the idea that the knight can travel in the light world. Why is this important? Well, 2 reasons. One is that a common idea for the theory of Des being the knight is that her case is similar to that of Gerson in Chapter 4, that being a darkner made from the remains of a deceased lightner. And even if someone's bringing Des's dust from location to location, this idea would still fail because Chapter 2's ending established that only a lightner can create a dark world. The second reason this is important is that it means that the knight has to actively be in Hometown or residing in a dark world within Hometown that they can leave. If this was Des, then the mystery's solved. Noelle's sister isn't some lost girl that we need to find. She's just being edgy and sneaking around town creating dark fountains without letting anyone know she's alive for some reason. But what about the other option for the knight's identity? Chris's brother Asriel, a left-handed lightner with a strong connection to Des, as seen by his belongings in her room, and who's allegedly away at college until the following week. Well, while light in evidence, there's a noteworthy connection that we can make in Chapter 2. You see, the deleted contacts and attempt to obscure the knight's identity twice in one chapter throughout Chapter 4 aren't the only times Chris has deliberately obscured information about a character in Hometown from us. When we're in Queen's Mansion, after Lancer helps us leave our room, we can check the different search results themed rooms based on different characters throughout Hometown. If we're with the rest of the party, Susie comments on Asriel's room, clearly amused by whatever's inside. However, if we're alone, we instead get this description. You opened the door with your eyes closed. You saw nothing. Just for comparison, while the game doesn't tell us what's in Birdley or Jockington's rooms when we attempt to look inside when alone, this is the only one where Chris themselves actively avoids even looking inside. While based on Susie's reaction, whatever's inside could be something light-hearted or unimportant, it's worth noting that this sort of deliberately obtuse, technically doing what the player wanted response is similar to their reaction with the door in the church at the end of Chapter 4. While there are, of course, also visual similarities between our encounter with the knight and the Asriel encounter at the end of Undertale's true pacifist ending, the biggest thing in favor of Asriel as the knight is that when we also tie this into the connection that Carol has in this whole set of events, something I'll return to in a minute, we can start to see a motive. A motive that Des as the knight seemingly lacks. But first, of course, let's talk about that Carol connection. After we attend church with Susie, we need to gather some clues regarding the shelter codes, with the clues we get being that Carol and Undyne are the only people Alphys has seen go to the shelter, and that Carol keeps everything important within her house. This is ultimately what brings us to the conclusion that we need to investigate the Holiday family residence. Once inside the house, when we're controlling the soul, we get to see a brief view of Carol's room, and while we don't get to see too much, the things that we can see are a katana and a corkboard, the kind usually used for conspiracy theories or investigations in media. While looking in the files reveals the room to still be mostly obscured, we can get a better look at these items. Additionally, we know that, when in the kitchen, Chris is on the phone with someone, and while we can't hear much of what they're saying, we can hear them talking about Dark Worlds, something about Undyne, a sacrifice, next week, Chris's soul, and notably about how Susie should not get the guitar which has the shelter code in it. This last part is important, as after Susie gets the guitar, following our antics in the closet, Chris calls someone who, based off of the context, would appear to be the same caller as before, as they're told about Susie and the guitar. Despite Chris deleting their contacts afterwards so that we can't see who they called, given that the person on the phone said they'd head that way and that not long after leaving Des's room, Carol appears and takes the guitar from Susie before kicking her out of the house, it would appear that the caller and or the one being called is Carol. Especially given that Noelle tells Asgore that Carol has work and is not going to be home for hours, further indicating that Chris's call prompted her to arrive sooner than anticipated. In case that evidence wasn't strong enough, during the weird route, at the point where we'd normally hear Susie talking outside Chris's house at the end of Chapter 4, Chris gets a call while in bed. Unlike before, we clearly hear everything the caller says, which I'll read here. "Chris, are you there? Then I'll just leave a message. You are going to the festival tomorrow, aren't you? I just wanted to confirm. Noelle said she's really looking forward to seeing you." Now, if the fact that this caller has spoken to Noelle since the visit to her house earlier that day wasn't enough of an indicator that this was Carol, the smoking gun is the voice. The voice used for the caller in this scene and Carol at the holiday residence are the exact same. Unfortunately, the voice on the phone in the prior two scenes is a bit garbled, so we can't use the sound of the voice to make a direct connection, but given the aforementioned evidence regarding Carol's early arrival, it seems likely to also be her. That being said, it is worth noting that at the end of a normal playthrough of Chapter 4, Chris gets a call from what appears to be the same unconfirmed caller as they had in Noelle's kitchen. If everything implying this to be Carol wasn't enough, the fact that in the weird route, Chris gets a call from Carol around this exact same time provides even more evidence for this idea to be the case. So, this gives us a sort of team behind the creation of the Dark Fountains, but what about that motive? The thing that I said Des Knight lacks? Well, while we're currently lacking any truly concrete evidence confirming that Des is trapped somewhere within a dark world in some way, shape, or form, we have been getting updates with each chapter release of someone lost and alone within the dark, with the sole exception of a scratching sound that they hear. This is commonly believed to be Des. And again, while we don't have anything that would make this link definitive, working with what we have, it's understandable to make the connection. A missing girl, and someone lost and seemingly alone in the dark. So if we were to make the assumption that this is Des, then it would make sense that one would want to search the Dark Worlds in an attempt to find her, whether that be through searching the Dark Worlds themselves, or even causing the roaring. After all, the roaring is described as an event when the light is subsumed by shadow in Chapter 2. If there was a time in which someone lost within the dark could be found, it'd likely be during this borderline apocalyptic event. Chapter 4 makes it clear that things relating to the prophecy are known, even if not understood, by those within Hometown due to the town's religion. The only issue left is how this trio, Chris, Carol, and Asriel, would know enough about the Dark Worlds to know that their best bet of finding Des is to open them. And unfortunately, here's where I'm going to have to admit that we don't have enough information to truly know or even make a sufficiently educated guess. But that doesn't mean that I can't try. The first guess would be Asgore. After we watch Asgore as he's cleaning the bathroom in the holiday house, we can check and see that he goes to Carol and Rudy's room, standing in front of the aforementioned corkboard. While there, he says this: "We're almost there, aren't we, old friend? This time for sure, Tori will finally see what really happened. That I just wanted to protect everyone. And this time, she'll have to believe me. They all will. Then, we'll all be a happy family again. Won't we? It sure is beautiful, isn't it? This black shard." Given that we get a black shard of our own after successfully beating the fight with a knight, who I believe to be Asriel in Chapter 3, this seems to imply that Asgore is aware of Dark Worlds to some extent. This especially seems to be the case, given his allusion to Toriel and potentially others not believing him. That said, at this time we don't know the sheer extent of this other than it likely being related to him no longer being the police chief in Hometown and his divorce with Toriel. That said, given that he can access Carol's room when we couldn't due to it being locked, she clearly trusts him enough to enter and see whatever's in there. Additionally, while again not being entirely concrete, him talking about this and looking at the shard in front of Carol's corkboard leads me to believe that he may have some knowledge of her investigation, assuming that's what the board indicates. The other potential solution I have in mind is that Gaster may have something to do with the plan to bring back Des from the dark. After all, their plan has clear connections to the Deltarune prophecy. This is important as the figure who speaks at the beginning of Chapter 1 during the Goner Maker segment, when retrying the night battle in Chapter 3, and at the end of Chapter 4, who is presumably Gaster, refers to the prophecy literally called Deltarune as My Deltarune. Additionally, the Knight also drops a Shadow Crystal at the end of their boss fight in Chapter 3. It's commonly believed that Jevil and Spamton, two other Shadow Crystal holders, have been implied to have interacted with Gaster personally, with Gerson being the exception as his Shadow Crystal was planted in his desk. Honestly, there's even the possibility of both of these solutions being true to some extent as well. Again, without further information that likely won't come until Chapter 5's release in 2026, I don't have enough information to confidently lock in an answer on this. Hey, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I've got at least one more bit of Deltarune lore that I'm confident will be solid enough to make a full theory on, and two that have caught my attention but that might either lack enough information at the moment or that might end up being dead ends. Regardless, I'm pretty confident in this theory. I don't think I missed anything, at least anything that would deconfirm or punch holes in the theory itself, though if I did, let me know in the comments. I try to be really thorough with my theories, but with all of the hidden dialogue and choices in Undertale and Deltarune, it can be easy to miss certain things when compared to FNAF and even much of Warcraft, both series who can be easier to document and analyze without missing anything at times. Though for sheer content density reasons, less so in regards to Warcraft. Anyways, I've got plans cooking in the background and theories that I'm working on, among other things. So, in the meantime, have a good one.